Зараз я проведу розмову з Мирославом Петрівом про його нову книжку «Yaroslав's Revenge», яка розглядає ключові та правдиві історичні події сучасної України. I'm joined by Miroslav Petriv, the author of Yaroslav's Treasure and now also Yaroslav's Revenge. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, for viewers' sake, can you explain what the premise is around, the second book?
Well, the second book is actually a continuation of the first book, as it continued adventures of Yaroslav, the protagonist of the first book. Basically, what I've done here is I've taken events of the last 4 or 5 years of very, very recent Ukrainian history, roughly from the end of 2006 to the end of 2009, so there's about a 3.5 year period there, and tied them into or wove them into a story. The actual events are true, unresolved murders, unresolved mysteries, and so on. Makes a great story, for one. For two, it also gives you a look at the recent events in Ukraine. One of my other ideas was to try to bring Ukraine into the mainstream of literature, and I'm talking about thrillers, because that's what this is, basically, it's a thriller. It's kind of bringing it out of the shadows. So it's also designed to interest somebody who wasn't Ukrainian and knows nothing about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ukrainian politics sure makes a good thriller, right? Do you think you could ever do that with Canadian politics?
Actually, I have a little bit of Canadian politics. Well, not so much Canadian politics, but Canada does play a larger role in this book than it did in my previous book. Uh-huh. In fact, I have the Canadian equivalent of the CIA involved in this storyline, and that's an organization known as ITAC. It's a branch of CSIS. Mm-hmm. Probably not all that well known, I suspect. It's the Integrated Threat Assessment Center, and there's a nuclear threat involved, and it's actually through the Canadian agency that the matters get resolved. Let's put it that way. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to write the second one? Continuing on from the first one.
First of all, I had the time to do it. Okay, I was temporarily retired, so I had the time to do it, and I've been tracking Ukrainian events literally daily. And so then I laid those events out in a timeline and thought of a storyline that would tie them all together and make for a very, very interesting thriller. So a lot of the names in the book are real. In fact, it's probably easier to name what isn't real than what is. What isn't real is, of course, the character of Yarko and Vlodko and the actual Poseidon Project. And you'll have to read the book to learn what the Poseidon Project was all about. Those things aren't real. Just about everything else is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, your first book, which was already published 2.5 years ago or so, it was set around the Orange Revolution, and you criticized Yanukovych. You also said that Yushchenko wasn't the answer at the time. Mm-hmm. What kind of reaction have you gotten to that book and the political aspect to it?
Actually, not that much of a reaction. Like, doesn't seem to be any argument with the premises of that book. The book actually ends beginning of 2005, so it's very, very shortly after Yushchenko becomes president, and very, very shortly after Tymoshenko becomes prime minister. So there's nothing there that deals with their actual activities and actions in power. That's in the first book. In the second book, yes, Yushchenko's president, of course. At the beginning, Yanukovych is prime minister. As you recall, he became prime minister in the summer of 2006. So he's already prime minister when the book begins. And at the end, of course, Yulia is prime minister. And we deal with some very interesting events that impact recent Ukrainian history, one of which there's recognition of Holodomor in Canada, right? By the Canadian government, I should say. There's the Georgian War, which I think is a pivotal event. Not so much in Georgian history, but maybe more so in Ukrainian history. That has become
why do you say that?
At the time, a lot of political commentators were seeing that war as a proxy war for Ukraine. Basically, and Medvedev was president of Russia at the time, he was sending a message, and it was also an event that caused or made apparent splinters within the so-called Orange Coalition and within Ukrainian society in general. There was a very much pro-Russian portion, and there was a very much anti-Russian portion. Specific examples, Yushchenko as president stated that any ship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet that took part in hostile activity or military activity could not return to port to Sevastopol. And literally the next day, Yulia jumps out and says, well, Ukraine's got no way of enforcing that. Don't, don't listen to Yushchenko. You can come on back to Sevastopol anytime you want. And right there was a very clear division between a relatively, I shouldn't say an anti-Russian, but certainly a pro-Ukrainian standpoint that Yushchenko was taking, and Yulia, who already had worked out an alliance with probably Putin at the time, although it was Medvedev that was the president.
So now we have another parliamentary election coming in October. You know, you've been taking a close look at everything over the years. What do you hope to happen in October?
You really want to know?
Yeah, sure.
Revolution. Election's not going to make any difference. And here's a very easy way to understand that. If you look at, for example, the language law that was passed but not yet ratified by the president, but passed by the parliament, who voted for language law? Well, the group that gave the language law the majority that it needed were part of Tymoshenko's bloc. They came in the list of candidates of Tymoshenko's party. They came in as Yulia's candidates, as Yulia's deputies. Once in parliament, they supported Yanukovych. And we are told now in order to correct all this, let's vote for Yulia's or for Butte's list of deputies again. There's no logic to it. Okay, and we see that you know, a good friend of mine here in Toronto said a little while ago that the moment you run for the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine, you become part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, do you think there's going to be a book 3 for you?
Is there a book
to finish off, you know, what's been happening recently?
There's a book 3, but it's difficult. It's kind of this heavy cross that I bear, because book 3 has to be Yaroslav, and it has to be the story of Yaroslav Mudry. And because it's a story of Yaroslav Mudry, it has to be in Ukrainian, and that's naturally a little bit more difficult for me. Now, I have published a Ukrainian book before, but you know, I'm not going to compete with people like Shklara, that's for sure. So that would be a difficult task, and yet I think it's a very interesting story that needs to be told.
Mirko, thank you so much.
Thank you.